The man we thought was stalking us was actually trying to save our lives. If we hadn't shared a trailhead with the red sedan, I probably would have noticed the smell in the back of my own SUV before we even cleared the canyon floor. But when you spend 40 minutes trying to pack a high-clearance truck into a wash without puncturing a sidewall on the yucca stumps, your focus narrows down to whatever is directly in front of your headlights. It was an old Chevy Cavalier, sun-faded to the color of a scab, parked so close to the wilderness boundary post that its passenger side mirror was brushing the bar wire. My buddy Toby actually joked about it while we were throwing our 5-liter bladders into our packs, saying whoever drove that piece of junk out here either had an incredible amount of faith in a front-wheel drive axle, or they didn't particularly care if they ever drove it back to Moed. The driver's side window was rolled down about 2 inches, just enough for the desert dust to coat the cheap velour dashboard, and I remember catching the smell of stale gas and peppermint gum when I walked past it to check the trail register. There were no other names signed in for that Thursday, just an empty line beneath a smear of red clay mud, which meant whoever belonged to the sedan was already out there somewhere in the white furnace of the lower gulch. We started dropping into the sandstone slots around 10, the heat coming off the slick rock so intense it felt like standing behind a running bus, and within 3 hours, the car was completely out of our minds. You don't think about vehicles when your shoulder straps are cutting through your shirt and your spit starts to taste like pennies. We made camp on a ledge above the dry creek bed that first night, and it wasn't until the sun dipped behind the canyon rim, turning the whole sky that bruised high-altitude purple, but I saw him. He was standing on a shelf of limestone about 400 yards across the wash, entirely silhouetted against the rimrock, just staring down at our little orange nylon tent. He didn't have a pack. That was the detail that made me sit up on my sleeping pad and reach for my knife. Out here, 3 miles from water, walking around without at least a bladder on your back is basically a death sentence. But he was just standing there in a dark long-sleeve shirt, completely motionless, matching our position. I woke Toby up pointing across the gap, but by the time he got his glasses on, the light had died completely, leaving nothing but the wind rattling the dry juniper needles. Toby told me I was seeing shadows or a stray bighorn, but when you spend your life looking at things through a viewfinder, you learn how to calculate human proportions against a horizon line. And I knew what an arm looked like when it was hanging dead at a man's side. The next morning, the heat came back double, a thick, suffocating weight that made our conversation dry up by noon. We were pushing deeper into the southern loop, a section where the canyon walls narrow down until you can touch both sides if you stretch your arms, and every time the trail twisted around an alcove, I started checking the little convex trail mirror I keep clipped to my shoulder strap. Around 3 o'clock, while Toby was sitting on a boulder trying to tape a hot spot on his left heel, I looked up at the switchbacks we'd just descended and caught a flash of dark fabric behind a boulder 3 levels up. He was following our pace exactly, staying just far enough back that the heat shimmer blurred his face into a featureless white oval, but he wasn't trying to hide anymore. He was just climbing down the same rocks we'd climbed, his movements jokey and unhurried, like a dog trailing a scent it already knows by heart. I didn't tell Toby, because his water compliance was already slipping. He was only taking tiny sips because his stomach was turning from the heat, and adding a stalker to a mild case of heat exhaustion seemed like a good way to trigger a full-blown panic 3 miles from the vehicle. We didn't stop for dinner that night. We just kept walking until our headlamps started bouncing off the canyon walls, finally dropping our bags in a sandy recess that felt slightly more defensible than the open benches. I didn't sleep a single minute, my fingers locked around the hilt of my camp knife, listening to the sand shifting in the wind and waiting for the sound of rubber-soled boots on the gravel outside our vestibule. Every time a pebble rolled down the scree pile 50 yards away, my ribs tightened until I couldn't breathe. When dawn broke over the wash, the light didn't feel like a relief. It just felt like a spotlight on an empty stage. We broke camp without making coffee, both of us too raw to speak. Our eyes locked on the rim above us as we pushed through the last 2 miles of sand toward the trailhead flat where the trucks were parked. My legs were trembling by the time we hit the final rise, my mind fully prepared to find the tires slashed or the windows smashed out. But when we cleared the ridge, the gravel lot looked completely undisturbed. The red sedan was still there, sitting in the exact same spot next to my Grand Cherokee, its rusted roof shimmering in the 10 a.m. glare. But as we got closer, I noticed the driver's side door of the Cavalier was wide open, swinging an inch or two in the dry desert breeze, and the keys were dangling from the trunk lock, glinting in the sun like a lure. Toby dropped his pack with a heavy groan, leaning against my tailgate while I fumbled with my remote fob, my hand shaking so badly I dropped the ring twice into the dirt. I unlocked the truck, desperate to get the air conditioning running, and that's when the smell hit us. Not the hot plastic smell of a car that's been sitting in the sun for 3 days, but something thick, sweet, and wet, like a cooler full of pork chops left out on a porch in July. Toby gagged, clapping his hand over his mouth and stepping back into the gravel, his face going a greasy shade of gray as he pointed through the tinted glass of my rear cargo area. Someone had jimmied the latch on my rubber storage bins while we were loading our packs 3 days ago, before we even hit the first mile marker, and the heavy plastic lids were sitting crooked on the carpet. I didn't open the trunk. I didn't have to, because through the side glass, I could see the edge of a blue tarp that didn't belong to me, tucked neatly beneath my sleeping bags, with a pair of cheap work boots sticking out from the fold, the leather caked in gray lime dust. I looked back over my shoulder at the long, empty line of the canyon switchbacks we'd just spent 48 hours checking for threats, realizing the man in the dark shirt hadn't been hunting us through the heat at all. He had been watching the lot from the ridges, waiting for us to drive away so he could come back for his sedan, before he realized we were heading straight back toward the only thing he'd left behind.